I should have gone straight back to the barracks after my shift at Fort Liberty ended, but guilt has a way of pulling you toward the places that hurt. My mother had called twice that afternoon, asking if I could stop by and review some insurance papers she claimed needed my signature before the holidays. Her voice had that trembling softness she used whenever she needed something from me, the same softness that always made me forget how many times she chose silence over protecting me. So I drove to her house in Spring Lake, the small brick place where I grew up, the one place that still smelled like cinnamon and old carpet. It was the night of December 14th, the air sharp enough to sting when I stepped out of my car. I noticed the lights inside were still on, even though she had told me she would be out running errands. That was the first thing that bothered me. The second was the sound I heard the moment I pushed the front door open without turning on the kitchen light. A low voice, gravelly and slow, drifted from the garage. My stepfather, Richard Collier. I froze with my hand still on the doorknob, letting my eyes adjust. My heartbeat moved in steady, measured beats, the kind you develop after 13 years of military policing, the kind that tell you to listen instead of run. Then I heard him speak again, this time more clearly, every syllable slicing clean through the cold air. Kill her with one bullet. Quick. Clean. She will never see it coming. My breath caught in my chest. The words hung there like a weight pressing against my ribs. For a second, I thought I had imagined them that maybe someone on the radio was saying something out of context. But then another male voice answered him calmer, almost bored, asking about time and payment. My training tells me that people reveal themselves when they think no one is listening. Richard sounded confident, calculated. Not like a man venting anger, but a man giving instructions. I leaned just enough to peek through the cracked door leading to the garage. The light was dim, but I could see the outline of Richard near the workbench, his shoulders stiff, his posture tight. My mother stood a few feet away, arms folded, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her face pale. She was not yelling. She was not shocked. She was not stopping him. She asked a question that felt like a cold hand around my throat. Are you sure this is necessary? And Richard replied in that tired, impatient tone he always used with her. She is a threat. She knows too much. My pulse shifted into something colder, steadier, more focused. Shock slid into stillness. Stillness slid into awareness. Awareness slid into survival. I stepped back softly, letting the door ease shut without a sound. My mind worked fast, breaking the scene into pieces the way we are trained to process threat environments. One unknown male. One confirmed intent. One complicit witness. One target. Me. I memorized every detail I could observe without looking again. Height. Build. Jacket. The faint rattle of keys in the stranger's pocket. The scrape of something metallic on the workbench. I moved through the kitchen the same way I have moved through unstable buildings overseas and hostile rooms stateside. Quiet, efficient, controlled. The cold outside hit my face the moment I stepped back onto the porch. I walked to my car without looking over my shoulder, though every instinct inside me pulsed with the urge to run. I sat in the driver's seat, shut the door gently, and locked it before allowing myself to breathe. My reflection in the side window looked unfamiliar. No fear, no panic. Just a calm that felt almost unnatural, the kind of calm that comes when the world turns sharp and you realize no one is coming to save you. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway without turning on the headlights until I reached the end of the street. The same sentence echoed in my mind with every turn of the wheel. Kill her with one bullet. That night I understood something I had avoided admitting for years. My stepfather did not simply dislike me. He did not resent my career or my independence or the fact that I never let him control me the way he controlled my mother. No, he wanted me gone. Not figuratively, not emotionally. Gone in a way you do not come back from. I drove until the neighborhood lights disappeared behind me and the road opened into quiet darkness. Then I whispered words I had never spoken out loud before. I am no longer his stepdaughter. I am his target. If you were in my seat hearing those exact words from someone inside your own childhood home, what would you have done in that moment? Where are you watching from? I was not always the woman who could slip into a room without making a sound or steady her breath while danger whispered her name. Long before I became Captain Sloan Mercer of the United States Army Military Police, I was just a girl growing up in a small rented house on Haymount Road in Fayetteville, a place where the walls absorbed every argument and the air always felt tight, like the whole house was holding itself together with whatever hope my mother had left. My parents divorced when I was 13. My father moved to Charlotte and remarried within a year, and my mother remarried even faster. That was how Richard Collier entered our lives, a man who shook my hand the first time we met and squeezed it a little too long, a little too firmly for a teenage girl. I remember not liking the way he looked at me, not with interest, but with the eyes of someone assessing something he wanted to control. By the time I turned 14, control was the only language Richard spoke. He decided when the lights went out. He decided which of my friends were bad influences. He decided what clothes were too loud or too independent. He decided how much money my mother could spend at the grocery store, what she could buy, and what she had to return if he said so. My mother used to be warm. She used to laugh. She used to make pancakes on Sundays. Under Richard, she became quiet, always cautious, always smoothing her hair, always checking the clock. He convinced her she could not live without him, and she believed him the way some people believe a warning siren even after the ground has stopped shaking. I learned early that speaking up made things worse. If I pushed back, my mother cried. If I questioned anything, Richard would stand in the doorway with that slow shake of his head, as if disappointed by a child who refused to understand that the world worked only one way and that way was his. He told her I was too opinionated, too stubborn, too much. He told her he would have an easier time raising me if I learned how to be soft, how to be grateful, how to be less. I was never good at being less. In high school, I joined every club I could. Track, debate, junior ROTC, anything that let me be out of the house. Anything that reminded me there was a world outside Richard Collier. When I enlisted at 18, I remember the exact expression on his face. Not fear, not sadness, annoyance. Like he was losing a piece of property he had not quite finished molding. He told my mother I would fail. He told her I would be home in 6 months begging for help. Instead, I graduated near the top of my training class and was selected for the military police. That made him furious in the way only quiet men become furious, the kind where the silence sharpens instead of softens. Every holiday visit after that felt like a negotiation. Richard would ask questions about my work that sounded polite but were really probes. Who do you report to? What do you see? How often are you on base? What systems can you access? I thought he was trying to act like a proud father. I was wrong. The shift began in 2021 when I noticed irregularities in some of my mother's mail. Late notices she insisted were mistakes. Overdraft fees she claimed she had already paid. I stopped assuming she was forgetful. I started watching more carefully. Small things added up. A credit card she swore she never applied for. A property tax bill that did not match the original mortgage, a letter from a collections agency under her name for a loan she said she never took. I requested to see the paperwork myself, and Richard nearly snapped the folder out of my hands. It was the first time I saw something like fear cross his face. A few months later, I learned why. Through publicly accessible records, I found a short chain of questionable financial actions connected to Richard. Minor laundering schemes masked through fake contracting jobs, high-interest loans taken in my mother's name, unpaid taxes on a secondary property he claimed had been sold years earlier. I confronted my mother gently. She begged me not to say anything. She told me he would fix it. She told me things were complicated. That was when something cold settled inside me, a truth I did not want but could no longer ignore. My mother was no longer a victim. She was a participant. She chose him every time she chose silence. The more Richard sensed I was getting closer to the truth, the more tension grew between us. It was not loud. It was not explosive. It was a tightening and invisible boundary he kept pushing closer and closer to my throat. Every time I visited, he watched me the way someone watches a locked door they know will eventually break open. By the end of 2023, I knew he feared only one thing: exposure. And I was the only person in his world he could not manipulate, the only person he could not buy. the only person he could not control. I did not understand yet how far he was willing to go to silence the one person who saw him clearly. But on the night of December 14th, 2 years after I uncovered his first fraudulent loan, I finally learned the answer, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. There is a moment in every soldier's life when something shifts, when the world stops moving like a blur of emotions and turns into clean, sharp lines of information. I felt that shift the second I drove away from my mother's house, my hands steady on the wheel even as the echo of Richard's words pulsed in my head. The part of me that had spent years trying to keep some piece of my family intact went silent. The part trained to assess, adapt, and survive took over. I was no longer reacting as a daughter. I was processing as an MP officer. The first rule is always the same. Separate emotion from assessment. Emotion clouds. Assessment clarifies. I replayed every detail from the garage with clinical precision. A male voice I did not recognize. Confident, not hurried, not nervous. The cadence suggested someone familiar with a negotiation. The words he used indicated prior experience, not someone doing something reckless for the first time. He was not a random hothead. He was local. He was comfortable. He was likely someone Richard knew through the underbelly of his failed contracting business. Not a professional, but not a bluff either. The second rule is identification of threat components. I listed them in my mind the way we list targets during a field exercise. Threat 1. Weapon. Richard had said one bullet, a handgun, something concealable, something cheap, something easy to pass from one man to another without paperwork. Threat 2. Timeline. I remembered the exact words from the unknown man. End of the week. That meant they planned something immediate, not hypothetical, not experimental, something already outlined, something already set in motion. Threat 3. Location. That was the only unknown. They did not specify where, which meant the risk zone was everywhere. My apartment, my car, the barracks, the grocery store, the base gate, home, anywhere that offered predictable patterns. Threat 4. Motivation. Richard believed I was a threat to him. The more I pieced together his fraudulent financial actions, the more I understood that his fear was not of me as a person. It was of what I could expose. A desperate man with debt, illegal dealings, and an ego built entirely on control becomes volatile when the one person he cannot manipulate sees through him. I had become the loose end he could not afford to leave untied. The third rule is immediate action, not panic, not confrontation. Action. I needed distance. Not just physical distance from my mother's house, but distance from any predictable routine. Driving back to my apartment in Fayetteville was not an option. If the man in the garage had followed me, if they were tracking me in any way going home, would be the first mistake. I pulled into a gas station on Bragg Boulevard and parked in the farthest corner. No one around. No direct light shining through my windows. I turned off the engine and sat still until the ticking of the cooling metal became the only sound. My training taught me how to slow my heartbeat, how to reduce my awareness to what mattered. Human movement, light changes, vehicle sounds. No one followed me. No one circled the lot. That gave me the window I needed. I took out my phone and typed notes the way we are taught during operations when we cannot speak aloud. Unknown male, Caucasian, approximate build. Wore a dark jacket, keys in right pocket, possible weapon on bench. Initiator of negotiation. End of week timeline. I saved it and sent a duplicate to my encrypted backup, then another to my cloud drive that auto timestamps every file. That way, if anything happened to me, the data would live. The fourth rule is communication, but communication depends on evidence. I could not call the police and tell them my stepfather was having a conversation about harming me without solid proof. It would become his word against mine, and I knew exactly how this would play out. Richard would charm the responding officer's claim it was a misunderstanding, make my mother cry on cue, and the situation would dissolve into nothing. Worse, he would know I overheard him, and desperate men move faster when they know they have been exposed. I needed more than suspicion. I needed something that could not be spun into a lie, something that could survive scrutiny, something that would force the truth into the open. The fifth rule is acceptance. acceptance of threat, acceptance of reality, acceptance that someone you once tried to love is capable of wanting you gone. That was the moment I felt something inside me go quiet, not broken, not numb. Quiet in a way that made every thought sharper. I had spent years telling myself Richard was toxic, controlling, manipulative. Words that soften reality. Words that let you pretend the danger is emotional, not physical. But as I sat in that dark corner of the gas station watching the fog from my breath disappear in the cold air, I said the truth out loud for the first time. My stepfather was not toxic. He was dangerous. Dangerous in the simplest, most literal sense of the word. And I was not safe until I moved like a soldier and thought like a survivor. I planned my next steps with that clarity. Stay public but unpredictable. Avoid home. Avoid routine. Stay near base facilities. Gather proof quietly. Observe from a distance. Let him think nothing had changed. Let him believe I was still the daughter who tried to keep peace. Because the moment he realized I was on to him would be the moment the end of the week arrived faster than either of us expected. I put the car in drive, merged into the quiet flow of late-night traffic, and followed a route that led away from everything familiar. This time, not out of fear, but out of intention. I had switched roles. I was no longer the girl Richard thought he could erase. I was the soldier he should have never underestimated. The first instinct most people have when they discover someone wants to harm them is to run to get as far away as possible to let distance feel like safety. Soldiers learn a different instinct. Distance only helps if you leave a trail of truth behind you. Truth is what holds people accountable. Truth is what survives. Truth is what protects. That is why our protocol is simple. Do not run. Document. I circled the block twice before I returned to my mother's neighborhood. I kept my lights off until the last corner and parked 3 houses down behind an old oak tree that cast enough shadow to hide my car from anyone glancing through a window. I did not step out immediately. I watched. Every movement, every flash of light, every car passing. Nothing looked unusual. That was the danger. When nothing looks unusual, everything could be. I slipped out of my car with the same silence I used in field training, keeping to the edge of yards where grass muffled footsteps. My mother's garage door was still half open, the light still on. The hum of the old overhead bulb flickered rhythmically, the sound familiar and unsettling all at once. I positioned myself behind the hedge that separated her yard from the neighbors and leaned just enough to see inside. Richard stood near the workbench, counting something. Bills. A stack of them, 20s and 10s held together with a rubber band. He handed them to the man I had seen earlier, and the exchange was so quick, so practiced, that I knew this was not the first time Richard had done business in the shadows of that garage. The man tucked the money into his jacket, glanced toward the driveway, then walked out of sight. A moment later, a car engine started. I ducked lower and waited until the headlights passed. I did not move until I heard the car turn onto the main road. When I stepped out from behind the hedge, I aimed my attention at the house across the street. The Hendersons. They had an old outdoor camera mounted above their porch. It was small, outdated, often flickering because of loose wiring, but still functional enough to catch motion. It faced partially toward my mother's driveway. If it captured even the edge of that man's car, that was something. I used my phone to zoom in as much as possible and snap several photos of the camera angle itself. That way, when I asked for footage later, I could argue line of sight. With careful timing, I approached the driveway and stayed near the bushes to avoid triggering any sensors. I pulled out my phone again with the camera ready. The garage had a small window low enough to catch a reflection if angled right. When Richard walked past it, I caught a blurry but identifiable silhouette. It was not enough to prove intent, but enough to place him in the garage after hours with an unidentified male. I stepped backward into darkness when I heard my mother's voice. She said something I could not make out, tired, pleading the way she always did when trying to calm him down. He grunted in response. A shadow moved across the garage floor. I backed away before either of them noticed and made my way to the side street. Once inside my car, I wrote down everything I saw, every timestamp I could estimate, every detail that could hold up later. The more I typed, the more the picture formed clearly. A man accepting cash, a man leaving hurriedly, a garage light left on too long, a conversation that sounded like fear wrapped in obedience. I sent the notes to my encrypted backup again. Then I opened my cloud drive and uploaded the images. Multiple folders, multiple labels. If someone tried to delete anything from my phone, there would be copies in 3 different locations before they could blink. After securing the digital trail, I drove toward Fort Liberty, but parked outside at a 24-hour cafe instead of entering the base. Entering would put my presence on a time-stamped log. Too predictable. Too traceable. At the cafe, I sat in the corner booth and used the public Wi-Fi to access legitimate open records. The MP system offers a portal that allows personnel to review publicly available data in a consolidated format. Not confidential, not restricted, but organized enough to save time. I searched Richard's name, then variations of it, then his old contracting business, 4 open liens, 2 late mortgages, collection notices from 3 lenders, civil penalties for unpaid taxes, and finally buried beneath outdated addresses and inconsistent filing dates a loan application from 2 years prior. I recognized the handwriting on the signature line, or rather, I recognized its failure to imitate mine. My name was there, my birthday, my social. But the curve of the letters was too soft, the spacing too wide, the slant wrong. Richard had forged my signature, and whoever processed the document had not questioned it. My pulse did not spike. My breathing did not rise. Military training teaches you not to react to the discovery itself, only to what the discovery means. And what this meant was motive. $70,000 in debt. A forged document linking his financial disaster to my identity. A threat of exposure. And a stepdaughter who had grown too skilled at uncovering his lies. I stared at the screen until the reality settled with icy precision. Richard was cornered, and cornered men choose the fastest way to eliminate the person who can destroy them. For years I had told myself he simply disliked my independence, that our tension came from personality. But the facts formed a different truth. He was not afraid of me. He was afraid of what I knew, and that fear was worth cash hidden in a garage and a whispered promise of 1 bullet. I stared at the loan document until the lines on the screen blurred, not from panic, but from the cold clarity settling deeper into my spine. Soldiers are trained to search for patterns to follow threads until they reveal what has been hiding in plain sight. This was not a single forged signature. It was part of a chain, and I had only touched the first link. I opened the county property database, next typing, slowly checking every variation of my mother's name. Richard's name, their address, every possible alias he might have used. When the page finally loaded, the truth rose like a tide I could no longer hold back. The house I grew up in, the house where I had just overheard a plan to harm me, had been refinanced 18 months earlier with my name listed as an additional guarantor. And the signature next to mine was the same incorrect curve, the same shaky slant, the same lazy attempt to make my handwriting look childlike and naive. Forged. Again. The lump in my throat was not fear. It was recognition. If this document ever became part of a larger investigation, it would show not just fraud but falsification tied to a financial institution. That crossed into federal territory. Richard was not risking an argument or a family fallout. He was risking prison, and he had chosen the simplest solution to protect himself. Remove the person who could prove what he had done. The deeper I read, the uglier the truth became. Multiple lenders, multiple loans. My personal information attached to documents I had never seen. When I scrolled to the bottom of one form, my stomach tightened at a line I had missed the first time. A secondary beneficiary listed in reference to a life insurance policy dated shortly after I deployed 2 years ago. My name, my mother's signature. But the beneficiary was not her. It was Richard. If I had died overseas, he would have collected everything. I had never signed off on that. I had never even been told it existed. A heavy realization pressed against my chest. My mother knew. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every forged signature. But she knew enough. She knew he had taken out financial policies linked to my name. She knew he had tied my identity to their house. She knew the man she married was drowning in debt and pulling everyone else under with him. And she said nothing. Silence is a choice. Silence is participation. Silence is complicity dressed in fear. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table as I leaned back and let the truth settle. My mother had not held a weapon in that garage. She had not handed cash to the stranger, but she had stood there, arms folded, voice trembling, asking if this was necessary. And she had not stopped him. That was the deepest cut, the kind that does not bleed but hollows. I shut my laptop and pressed my palms flat against the table the way we do after gathering evidence at a crime scene, grounding myself before the next move. I repeated the facts out loud to anchor them. Richard forged my signature. Richard tied me to illegal loans. Richard refinanced the house using my identity. Richard listed himself as beneficiary on insurance that was never approved by me. Richard paid someone to cause harm. My mother watched. Once you say the truth without sugarcoating it, the emotional fog lifts. Everything sharpens. I opened my laptop again and searched through every public archive available. Property deeds, utility records, bankruptcy filings, contractor licenses, tax forms. The more I looked, the more the pattern repeated. Every financial mess he created was built on someone else's name. Mostly my mother's. Recently, mine. Then I found the document that made everything fall into place. A letter from a collections agency filed 6 months earlier addressed to me listing a debt I had never taken. At the bottom was a note stating failure to resolve could trigger legal review. If any review occurred, investigators would contact the other co-signer, my mother. And if I denied ever signing it, they would compare handwriting and dates, and someone would realize my name had been forged. Everything would unravel. Richard would be exposed. His scams, his debts, his tax evasion. All of it. Suddenly, the timeline made sense. The urgency. The phrase, end of the week. He was out of time. He needed me gone before anyone looked closely. Before I opened my mouth. Before I said something that could not be unsaid. There was a reason he had been colder than usual during Thanksgiving. A reason he had asked too many questions about my deployment schedule. A reason he had insisted I sign so many papers without reading them. He had not been trying to guide me. He had been setting me up. My chest tightened in a way I had not felt since basic training when I learned how quickly trust could be used against you. But this was worse. This was betrayal bred over years, fed by silence, protected by a mother who loved peace more than truth. I whispered the words I needed to hear myself say. He does not want control anymore. He wants elimination. The truth hit like a clean blow. My stepfather had not become dangerous overnight. He had always been dangerous. I had just never let myself believe how far he would go. Now I had the proof, and proof meant power. The next phase would not be about fear. It would be about strategy. It would be about turning every document he forged and every lie he built into the weapon he never expected evidence. The moment the full scope of Richard's motive settled into place, something inside me aligned with the muscle memory built over 13 years of military policing. Civilian fear is chaos. Soldier fear is calculation. My emotions didn't disappear. They simply moved aside to make room for protocol. MP protocol. Stay ahead of the killers. The first step was eliminating predictability. Predictability gets people hurt. I pulled out a notepad I kept in my glove compartment and wrote 3 words at the top the same way we write mission priorities. Movement, shelter, security. Movement meant I needed to stop driving the same routes. Every soldier has habits even off duty. Where we gas up, where we grab food, which roads feel familiar after long shifts. I circled the ones Richard knew, then I crossed them out. New routes only. 2 in daylight, 3 after dark. No patterns, no loops, no comfort. Survival requires losing comfort. I studied a map of Fayetteville marking grocery store parking lots with multiple exits, late-night pharmacies with camera coverage, and open 24-hour businesses I could duck into if someone followed me. If the man in the garage had been paid for surveillance as well, he wouldn't get more than fragments. Never the full picture. Shelter was next. My apartment was out. Richard had been there before. He knew the layout. He knew where I parked. He knew the spare key I kept under the old potted fern by the stairs. And if he knew all that, the stranger in the garage might know too. I made a list of places I could sleep without raising suspicion: the transient quarters on base, the gym locker room with restricted access, the resting rooms in the MP building where exhausted soldiers sometimes grabbed 2 hours between shifts, even my patrol SUV if absolutely necessary. Each option had cameras, restricted entry, or other personnel around. Security through presence, not isolation. Security meant weapon access, legal issued, traceable. I checked my M18 service pistol, inspected the slide, the barrel, the spring tension. Clean, functional, reliable. I loaded the magazine and secured it in a lockbox in the car. On civilian ground, even trained MPs have to follow the rules with stricter margins. Any misuse would turn the investigation against me. A weapon is only protection when its legality is unquestioned, but I also needed a non-firearm option. Something quick, something subtle, something I could use in a parking lot without escalating into a full-blown incident. I slid my expandable baton into my bag. Military police are trained to neutralize threats with minimal force. If someone came too close, they would meet steel before they ever touched my skin. Once movement shelter and security were outlined, I shifted to the next phase: documentation transfer. Evidence is only powerful when someone else knows it exists. Someone trustworthy, someone with rank, someone who could pull strings if civilian law enforcement doubted me. Major Elena Cortez. She was my direct superior at Fort Liberty, known for an iron spine and a reputation that made even senior officers sit straighter. She didn't tolerate games. She didn't tolerate excuses. She certainly wouldn't tolerate conspiracy if she saw enough smoke to suspect a fire. I moved to the parking lot of a well-lit grocery store, angled my car so both side windows were visible in the reflection of the storefront glass, and typed a message on my encrypted work phone. "Ma'am, urgent. Need eyes on potential threat related to civilian matter. Sensitive. Need to speak privately." I hit send. 2 minutes later, the 3 dots appeared. When? Now. I drove toward the MP building but didn't approach the main entrance. Instead, I parked at the back where the overhead lights were brightest and the cameras had the clearest angle. Cortez walked out 10 minutes later in uniform pants and a winter coat. Her hair tied back tautly, her posture firm even at midnight. She opened the passenger door and sat without a greeting. I handed her my phone with the copied files: mortgage scans, forged signatures, loan documents, a screenshot of Richard's late notices, a typed summary of what I heard in the garage. She scrolled slowly, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she rested the phone on her knee. "You're telling me your stepfather hired someone?" The way she said the word hired made it sound like a surgical instrument. "Yes, ma'am. And you heard this clearly?" "Yes. And you believe the intent was real?" My jaw tightened. "He paid him." She looked away for a long moment, exhaled slowly, then nodded once her version of showing concern. "If what you're saying is real, you're in danger on civilian ground. MPs have jurisdiction only on federal property. Off base, you are essentially on your own until local law enforcement steps in." That wasn't news to me. I knew the limits. I knew the gaps. She continued, speaking, voice calm but firm. "I cannot order an investigation based on this. Not yet. But I can tell you what you already know. You must stay off predictable paths. You must stay where others can see you. And you must not confront him alone." "Understood," I said. She leaned closer slightly. "And Mercer, if this escalates, you come to me before you go to anyone else. Do not let pride or sentiment get in the way." I nodded. She knew exactly what she was saying. Pride, sentiment, daughter, soldier. These lines blur when family becomes the enemy. She placed my phone back in my hand. Her voice was steady, the way it always was during high-risk briefings. "Document everything, protect yourself, and stay one step ahead." As she walked away, I realized that was exactly what I was already doing. I was not hiding. I was preparing, because once a soldier accepts the truth of the threat, the only direction left is forward. 3 days passed in a blur of shifting routes, sleepless hours, and the constant awareness that danger does not announce itself twice. By the night of December 17th, my nerves were steady, but my mind was sharpened to a point. I had followed every MP protocol I knew, avoided predictable movements, stayed near public lighting, and slept only in places with cameras and badge access. But danger often waits for the one moment you feel even slightly human again. It was 11:30 p.m. when I turned onto the narrow street leading to my apartment complex in Fayetteville. The cold air had settled into a thin mist, the kind that clings to headlights and softens distant shapes. I had stopped home only twice since the night in the garage, both times during the day. Both times for less than 5 minutes to grab uniforms and rotate out anything Richard might have expected me to carry. Tonight, I returned only because I needed one folder from my locked footlocker. A single document related to my mother's mortgage. The kind of proof that could turn suspicion into certainty. I slowed as I approached my usual parking spot near the stairwell. At first, I thought the dark shape leaning over the rear of my SUV was a shadow, maybe a trick of the fog. But then it moved. A man stood beside my vehicle, angled in a way that looked intentional, not accidental. He wore a reflective vest, the kind utility workers use, and held a small flashlight pointed at my rear wheel. What bothered me first was the vest. It was spotless. New. Not the kind worn by someone who actually worked late shifts. What bothered me second was his posture. He wasn't inspecting. He was waiting. My MP instincts reacted before my fear had the chance. I kept my SUV rolling forward, passing my spot without slowing. I didn't look at him directly. I didn't give him the courtesy of confirming I'd noticed him. I drove 3 more spaces down, turned right, and circled the entire lot, watching from the corner of my eye. He remained exactly where he stood, head angled slightly upward as if tracking my movement, not the tire he pretended to check. A real technician would have looked confused. A real technician would have waved me down and said something. This man stayed still. Ready. I parked on the opposite side of the complex facing the exit and kept my engine running. My breath was calm, my heartbeat, even my training taking the lead. I did not step out. I did not reach for my weapon. Not yet. Instead, I lowered my head enough to shield the glow of my phone and dialed 911. With the precision of someone who has done it under far worse conditions. When the operator answered, I spoke quietly but clearly. This is Captain Sloan Mercer, United States Army Military Police. I need immediate civilian response at my location. Possible impersonation. Possible armed threat. Code military verification in place. The operator repeated my information automatically, then switched tones the moment she heard the words. Military police. Help was on the way. Estimated arrival 7 minutes. In threat assessment terms, 7 minutes is long enough for a man with intent to close distance block exits or test whether his target is the type to panic. I watched him from across the lot. He adjusted his vest. He walked around my SUV slowly. He touched the rear bumper as if checking for something. Then he crouched. My shoulders tightened. Crouching meant placement. Placement meant preparation. Preparation meant he wasn't just watching me. He was setting something up. I reached for my baton instead of my firearm. Firing a gun in a crowded apartment complex would lead to investigations that could bury the actual threat, but a baton could stop a man without giving him anything to twist against me later. Before I could decide whether to move closer or stay inside the vehicle, the man jerked his head toward the far end of the lot, not at me, at sound. Sirens, approaching fast, too fast for a coincidence. The man stood straight and walked quickly toward the side gate, then broke into a run the moment he thought he was out of sight. He wasn't. I started my engine, drove toward the gate, and saw enough of the fleeing figure to confirm the worst same build as the man in the garage. Same stride. Same jacket. He jumped into a small silver sedan parked illegally near the dumpsters. The moment the engine revved, the license plate illuminated under the streetlight. I memorized every letter before he sped out. The police cruiser arrived just as he turned onto the main road. I flagged them down, stepped out, and gave a full statement with the exact clarity of military training. The officers ran the plate, typing quickly. One looked up at me with attention that told me everything before he even spoke. That plate belongs to the same vehicle neighbors reported near your mother's residence 3 nights ago. My skin went cold, but my voice didn't waver. That was the night I overheard the threat. The officer nodded slowly. "You need to understand something, Captain. If he was here tonight, he wasn't here to send a message. He was here to finish one." I didn't flinch. I didn't breathe for a moment. Then I answered with the same certainty that had been building in me since the garage. "I know, and I'm not letting him try again." The night the man fled my driveway, something inside me hardened into resolve. Fear had done its job. It had warned me, sharpened me, awakened every instinct I had spent years honing. But now it had to step aside. Strategy needed room to breathe. If Richard wanted silence, then silence would become the one thing I refused to give him. He wanted the truth buried. That meant the truth was the weapon. And I was done fighting him in the dark. I drove to the 24-hour MP facility on post, parked under the brightest floodlight, and laid my notebook across my lap. The cold air seeped through the rolled-down window and kept me alert, every breath a reminder of the stakes. The plan required precision. Exposure is not chaos. Exposure is a system. You gather, you organize, you time the detonation so no one can bury the debris. I wrote 3 words on the top of a clean page. Truth is leverage. Then I started assembling everything. First, I opened my laptop and retrieved the mortgage records, the forged refinance, the mismatched signatures, the falsely listed guarantors. I sorted them into folders labeled Loan 1, Loan 2, Property Documents, Secondary Financing. Then I added the digital images of the envelopes addressed to me from debt collectors, each stamped with due dates that did not match anything I had ever agreed to. Next came the insurance documents. The discovery had sliced me the deepest, but pain is irrelevant when you need clarity. I added copies of the policy forms tied to my deployment's policy adjustments. I had never signed updates that replaced my previous beneficiary, and the forms listing Richard as the one who would receive everything if something happened to me either overseas or stateside. Then came the audio reconstruction. During the last 3 days, I had requested footage from the Hendersons, the neighbors whose porch camera angled toward my mother's driveway. Their system was weak, old, glitchy, but the camera had captured the outline of the man entering my mother's garage that night. It had also recorded several seconds of audio, distorted, muffled, but clear enough to hear a sentence in pieces. Her. 1 bullet. Quick. Finish. It wasn't enough to convict him, but it was enough to expose him. Enough to destroy the lie he spent years crafting about being the responsible stepfather, the family pillar, the man who supported his wife's daughter even when she was ungrateful. Every manipulator has a performance. Every performance has an audience. I intended to remove his stage. I added the blurry screenshot of the man handing Richard something in the garage. Then I added the timestamp confirmation from the responding officer the night the driveway intruder ran the exact match of the silver sedan's license plate to the one spotted near my mother's house 3 nights earlier. Next came the emails. My mother didn't write many, but Richard did. Short messages. Directive. Condescending. Proof of financial control. I included everyone, and I added my notes, every detail I remembered from the garage. The tone of the men's voices, the exchange of money, the timeline. The more evidence I assembled, the clearer the plan became. The truth alone was not enough. Truth had to be delivered. Truth had to be made undeniable. Truth had to be seen by everyone he couldn't manipulate. That meant sending it beyond him, beyond my mother, beyond the 4 walls where he had held control for nearly 2 decades. He had built his entire reputation on 2 pillars: extended family and business contacts. To the relatives, he was the loyal husband caring for a difficult stepdaughter, the man who stepped in when my mother struggled financially. To his contracting partners, he was the tough negotiator, the dependable worker, the man with a firm handshake and spotless record. He needed them, their approval, their beliefs, their ignorance. If I destroyed that, I destroyed his protection. I created 2 new folders, family release and professional release. In the family release, I placed copies of the forged mortgage, the forged loan signatures, the hidden insurance policy, the audio clip, the truck footage, the license plate match, and a single page summarizing the timeline of events leading to the night in my driveway. In the professional release, I included tax discrepancies, contractor complaints I found in public records, late payments, suspended permits, and statements from two small businesses accusing him of withholding payment during previous contracts. The truth was not limited to what he did to me. It extended to who he was to everyone. He had spent years weaving stories that placed him at the center of competence and reliability. Reality painted a different picture. Before the night was over, I intended to show everyone that picture. I drafted a message. Not long, not emotional, not angry, just facts. Hello. I am sharing this information because ongoing safety concerns require full transparency. The attached documents include evidence of forged signatures tied to my name, and my mother's illegal refinancing actions, unauthorized insurance policies, and a potential attempt to cause me harm. Due to the seriousness of these findings, I am ensuring that multiple parties are aware for documentation and protection purposes. Sloan Mercer, U.S. Army Military Police. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an accusation. It was a warning. A calm, measured, unstoppable warning. I saved the draft and set a timed send December 24th at 6:00 p.m., Christmas Eve. The one night extended family gathered. The one night everyone expected peace. The one night exposure would land with the greatest impact. If he wanted silence in darkness, I would give him truth in daylight. I spent the next hour adding one more layer, a hard drive backup containing every piece of information. I labeled it Emergency Archive and placed it inside my MP lockbox. Then I emailed a private copy to Major Cortez with a subject line she would understand. Insurance. She didn't reply immediately. She wouldn't until she had reviewed everything carefully. That was her way. That was why I trusted her. When I finally leaned back in the driver's seat and closed my eyes, I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt readiness. Exposure was not revenge. Not yet. Exposure was protection. Exposure was strategy. Exposure was truth, refusing to stay buried any longer. If he wanted to erase me, he should have been more careful with his lies. Because now the truth had teeth, and I was ready to let it bite. Christmas Eve has a way of making even strained families move like they're part of a holiday commercial. Lights glowing, candles flickering, laughter floating through the air as if no one in the room has ever lied, betrayed, or chosen fear over truth. I drove to my Aunt Mary Ann's house in Raleigh on the evening of December 24th because that was where every branch of my mother's family gathered each year. The same house, the same menu, the same polite conversations, the same performance. I arrived at 5:42 p.m. wearing my service dress uniform, the deep blue jacket, the pressed trousers, the polished Oxfords. Not because I needed the formality, but because I wanted them to see who I had become without anyone else's permission. When I stepped into the living room, the warmth hit me first, then the sound. Everyone talking at once. My cousins near the fireplace. My uncles arguing playfully over football. The smell of ham and spiced cranberries drifting from the kitchen. And then Richard's voice cutting through it all like he owned the room. He laughed loudly, retelling some exaggerated story about fixing a neighbor's roof for free. A story I knew wasn't true because the neighbor had complained last summer that Richard overcharged him for a 5-minute repair. But tonight, with a glass of eggnog in hand, he played the role effortlessly. The helpful stepfather, the devoted husband, the man who brought stability to a struggling single mother and her unpredictable daughter. A few people slapped him on the back as he joked about holiday stress and family chaos. I watched the scene from the doorway, and for a moment it felt like I was seeing my childhood staged in front of me. The same mask, the same charm, the same polished lies. He spotted me a second later and stretched his arms wide as if he had been waiting all night for me to arrive. There she is, our soldier girl. Come here, sweetheart. Let me look at you. His voice was warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know better, anyone who hadn't heard him say, "Kill her with one bullet." I didn't walk into his arms. I didn't smile. I simply nodded once and stepped past him without accepting the hug he pretended to offer. My mother appeared behind him almost instantly, wringing her hands in the way she did whenever she felt a storm building. She looked at me with eyes full of something between guilt and fear, but she didn't speak. She didn't ask how I'd been. She didn't pull me aside. She didn't warn me. She just looked. A silent apology she never had the courage to voice. I made my way through the room, slowly greeting relatives who hadn't seen me since last Christmas. They asked the usual questions. How was work? Did the army keep me busy? Was I dating anyone? When would I settle down? But beneath their polite smiles was a deeper curiosity whether I was still the outsider, the different one, the daughter who left and never quite came back. I answered each question calmly, my eyes drifting now and then to the clock on the wall. 5:58 p.m. 2 minutes until the timed email would be delivered to every inbox in that room. I took a seat on the sofa near the window and observed the way MPs observe before making a move. Richard was performing for a small crowd, gesturing passionately with his glass, laughing too loudly, telling a story about me, a fabricated one about how I once dented his truck, and he graciously forgave me. The group chuckled. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. In 60 seconds, his lies would unravel faster than he could shape them. My mother drifted behind him, like a shadow, smiling faintly, nodding, pretending everything was normal. But her eyes moved continuously, scanning the room, then landing on me over and over again, as if she sensed something was coming. She didn't know what, but she felt it. The moment arrived quietly. No countdown, no dramatic shift in lighting. Just a faint chime from the first phone, then another, and then the ripple began. 6 phones buzzed. 10. 15. A chorus of notifications layering on top of each other. People reached into pockets and purses, glancing down with casual curiosity at first. Then confusion. Then silence. The entire room went still in less than 20 seconds. My Aunt Marianne squinted at her screen, her brows knitting together. My cousin Kevin stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening. Then someone near the fireplace whispered, "What is this?" Richard's back was still turned mid-laugh, holding court. He didn't realize the room behind him had frozen like a staged photograph. Aunt Marianne was the first to speak clearly, her voice soft but trembling. "Sloane, what is this?" Richard glanced over his shoulder, annoyed by the interruption. When he saw half the room staring at their phones instead of at him, he straightened, adjusting his shirt collar the way he always did when trying to regain authority. "What's going on?" His voice carried mild irritation. Then his phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then it vibrated continuously in his pocket. He slipped it out, glanced at the screen, and the color drained from his face instantly. His hand trembled. The glass of eggnog slipped and shattered on the tile floor. The room didn't flinch. Not one person moved to clean it. His lips parted, but no words came. My mother turned pale. The air seemed to thicken heavy with every truth he'd buried. And then, someone read aloud, not loudly, but loud enough, one line from my summary. Evidence of forged signatures tied to Sloane Mercer's identity. Another relative looked up from her phone and swallowed hard. "What is this, Richard?" Babies stopped fussing. Conversations halted completely. Holiday music continued to play through the speakers, painfully cheerful against the weight of the moment. My cousin Emily, whose opinion rarely mattered to anyone until now, stepped forward and said the words that split the room. "Did you take out loans in Sloane's name?" My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Richard opened his, but only stuttered half syllables. The tidal wave hit, questions fired from every corner. What is this mortgage paper with her name on it? Why is this signature different? Why is your name the beneficiary on her policy? What is this audio file? The audio. Someone played it out loud. The muffled snippet. Her. One bullet. Quick. Finish. It was enough. Enough to expose. Enough to confirm the worst. My mother sank into a chair, shaking. Richard lunged toward her as if trying to reclaim the last shred of control he had left. "Stop reading that," he barked. "It's manipulated. It's lies." But his voice broke, and everyone saw it. Every mask he had worn for nearly 20 years cracked clean through. They expected me to sit there and smile, to play the daughter, to play the one who always stayed quiet. Instead, I watched truth detonate in that living room exactly the way it needed to silence sudden devastating. They didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The moment the first wave of shock settled over the room, I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just with the steady finality of someone who had spent 3 days preparing for this exact second. 23 relatives filled my aunt's living room, frozen in place, clutching their buzzing phones as if they were holding evidence from a crime scene. No one spoke. Even the Christmas music in the background seemed to dim, though I knew it hadn't. Sometimes silence grows so heavy it swallows the rest of the world with it. I reached into my uniform jacket and removed the small black USB drive I had carried with me since dawn. A simple device, but loaded with everything Richard prayed would never see the light. When I walked toward the television, Richard finally snapped back to life. His voice cracked across the room. "Sloan, don't you dare!" It wasn't the voice he used earlier, the warm public mask. It was the real one, sharp, threatening, cornered. My Aunt Marianne tried to step between us but stopped when she saw my face calm, expressionless, focused. She lowered her hand slowly and stepped aside. I knelt by the entertainment stand, plugged the USB into the back of the TV, and selected the folder marked Holiday. The first image filled the screen. A grainy but unmistakable still frame captured from the Hendersons' porch camera. The silver sedan, the same one parked near my apartment when the man tried to ambush me. The same one neighbors saw outside my mother's house the night I overheard the plan. Beneath the image was the license plate number enlarged for clarity. Several relatives gasped softly, connecting the dots themselves. My cousin Kevin muttered, "Oh my God, that's the same plate the police mentioned last year when someone slashed Marianne's tires." The attention in the room shifted instantly. One lie exposed tends to unravel the others. Before anyone could fully process the first image, I clicked to the next file. The refinanced mortgage documents appeared, filling the large screen with high-resolution copies. Page after page, highlighted signatures. My name curved in handwriting that wasn't mine. My mother's name attached to numbers she never understood. Richard's name at the bottom, listed as an authorized co-signer on a document he had no legal right to control. Aunt Marianne covered her mouth. My Uncle Raymond shook his head slowly. Someone whispered, "That's a felony." Then the screen shifted to the loan documents. All three, labeled by date, each one with forged information tied to my identity. The interest rates, the payback terms, the false addresses, and that same shaky imitation of my signature. When the room started murmuring, Richard stepped forward, face red, hands trembling, jaw clenched as if his teeth were splintering. "Enough," he barked. "Turn that off. Turn it off right now." My mother reached for him, voice trembling. "Richard, please don't," but he yanked his arm away as if her touch burned him. He lunged toward the television. "Not at me. At the evidence." He grabbed the HDMI cable and tried to rip it out, but I had predicted that. I had taped it down. He tugged again harder, but the cord held. The struggle made him look wild, desperate, exactly as guilty as he was. My cousin Emily's voice cut through the chaos. "Why is your signature on her refinance, Richard?" He didn't answer. He just kept pulling the cable. When he couldn't break it, he slammed his palm against the TV frame. That's when I clicked on the next file. The room froze again. Text messages appeared. Richard's messages. Dozens of them. Screenshots dated over the last year. Sometimes to my mother, sometimes to people labeled only by first initials. All of them revealing financial panic accusations, anger threats disguised as ultimatums. One message to my mother read, "If she keeps digging, we're done. Handle it or I will." Another sent to an unknown number. "She won't be a problem after this week." My mother collapsed into a chair, her face crumpling into silent tears, as if seeing the words in writing made them undeniable even to her. The final file waited. The one no one was prepared for. The audio. I pressed play. The muffled garage echo filled the room. Not clear, not perfect, but clear enough. The stranger's voice first. "So, the end of the week, yeah." Richard's voice answered. "Just one bullet. Quick, clean. She'll never see it coming." The room erupted not in noise, but in a gasp so loud it felt like a physical force. My Aunt Marianne staggered back into the coffee table. One of my younger cousins ran out of the room crying. My Uncle Raymond cursed under his breath. My mother sobbed into her hands. And Richard finally broke. "That's taken out of context," he roared, his voice cracked with panic. "It doesn't mean what you think." But nothing he said could undo what they had heard. Words are weapons, spoken freely when a man believes he will never be caught. And now those same words were a noose tightening around him in front of every person he depended on for reputation and support. He lunged again this time at the TV itself, reaching for the USB still plugged into the back. I stepped in front of him. Not aggressively, just firmly. He tried to shove past me, but years of military training do not yield to the strength of a 58-year-old man fueled by adrenaline and fear. I held my ground with one hand on his forearm and pushed him back a single step enough to show him he wouldn't reach the evidence. Not tonight. Not ever. The room watched in stunned silence as his mask peeled away entirely. No charm, no warmth, just fury, just guilt, just truth. He pointed at me with a trembling finger. "You think you're exposing me? You're ruining this family. All of it." I met his eyes steady and unblinking. "You tried to end me. This family deserves to know the man behind the performance." Behind me, the audio file repeated faintly as the clip looped. "Kill her with one bullet." Someone turned off the Christmas music. Someone else closed the blinds. The entire room had shifted from disbelief to horror to clarity. Every relative who had ever defended him now stared as if seeing him for the first time. And in a way they were. People show their true face when truth strips away every lie they hide behind. Richard had wanted me silent, invisible, erased. Instead, standing in that living room with 23 pairs of eyes watching the last pieces of his image crumble, I realized something with absolute certainty. He had never expected me to survive long enough to speak, and now the whole room was listening. The moment the audio looped a second time, the atmosphere inside my aunt's living room changed from shock to something heavier: judgment, recognition, a collective understanding that everything they had believed about Richard Collier had been a carefully crafted lie. And now the lie had shattered. He stood in the center of the room, chest heaving, face-flushed eyes darting from person to person like a trapped animal searching for an exit. But every doorway was blocked by someone who had once defended him. The mask he'd worn for nearly 2 decades had cracked clean down the middle, and the real man underneath was finally visible. My cousin Kevin stepped forward first, phone still in his hand, jaw tight with anger. "I'm calling the police!" Richard spun toward him so fast his elbow knocked a candle off the mantel. "You put that phone down." His voice was sharp enough to split glass, but Kevin didn't move. He raised the phone higher and repeated louder this time, "I'm calling the police!" My mother lurched forward, pale and shaking. "Richard, please stop. Please." She grabbed his sleeve in desperation, but he shook her off violently, not with strength, but with sheer panic. She stumbled, almost falling against the coffee table. Her tears came immediately. The entire room flinched at the sight. For years, she had defended him, shielded him, made excuses for him, and he hadn't hesitated for even a second to shove her aside the moment she became inconvenient. That was all it took. You could feel the shift. The family that had once laughed at his stories now stared at him like he was something unrecognizable, something dangerous, something they wished they'd noticed sooner. Richard pointed at me, then finger trembling. "She's framing me. She's always hated me. She's jealous of what I've done for this family. He sputtered, searching for words like a drowning man reaching for a rope, but no one moved to throw him one. My Aunt Marianne's voice cracked through the silence. "Richard, that recording?" His face contorted. "It's fake. You think she wouldn't go that far? She's military. She knows how to manipulate things." I let out a breath through my nose, slow, controlled. If I had wanted to manipulate anything, I would have done it quietly, legally, discreetly. Instead, I stood here in front of 23 witnesses exposing the truth in the one place he thought he owned. I stepped forward, voice steady. The audio came from the Henderson's porch camera. "It's time-stamped. It was reviewed by a responding officer. And the license plate you saw on that screen," he cut me off, yelling. "Coincidence. Anyone can drive that car." I tilted my head just slightly. Then why did the officer confirm it matched the vehicle seen near my mother's house the night you discussed my disappearance? The room hummed with tension. A low, collective exhale. A few people murmured things like unbelievable and how could he? My cousin Emily's husband whispered, "This is insane." Richard lunged toward the TV again as if destroying the evidence would rewind the last 10 minutes. But Uncle Raymond stepped in his path. A broad-man retired firefighter not easily moved. He planted both hands on Richard's shoulders and pushed him back. "Sit down," Richard snarled, twisting under the grip. "Don't touch me. Sit down." Raymond repeated, voice low but immovable. And for the first time since I had known Richard, he obeyed someone other than himself. He fell into the armchair chest, rising and falling rapidly, hands gripping the edges as if bracing against gravity. My mother hovered near him, sobbing quietly, torn between fear and denial. But even she didn't sit beside him. Not this time. Not after seeing the evidence. She looked at me with a kind of sorrow that didn't ask for forgiveness, just understanding. But I had none to give in that moment. Not yet. Kevin had finished his call. "The police are on the way." Richard's head snapped up. "What? No! This is a family matter. You don't bring outsiders into family matters." My aunt let out a shaky breath. "Family doesn't hire people to hurt family." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Years of small suspicions people had ignored suddenly found their answers. Years of moments they had brushed aside his temper, his control, his way of twisting narratives now fit together like puzzle pieces forming the real man. Richard's voice climbed into hysteria. "You're all blind. She's doing this to ruin me. She wants me gone." I held his stare. "You did that yourself." His nostrils flared, fury rising, but he couldn't speak. Not one word came out. His breath stuttered, caught between rage and fear. Aunt Marianne took a step toward me, her voice soft but certain. "Sloan, is this why you sent those emails?" I nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. I wanted everyone to see the truth before it disappeared." Emily's father whispered to his wife. "He would have succeeded. If she hadn't overheard, he would have." But he didn't finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air like invisible smoke. My mother cried harder. The police sirens faintly echoed outside, growing louder as they turned into the neighborhood. Richard stood so suddenly the chair slid back into the wall. "You can't let them take me." He grabbed my mother's arm again. "Tell them it's lies. Tell them she's unstable. Tell them—" She yanked her arm free. It was the smallest rebellion, but it shattered him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You wanted her gone, Richard. You wanted my daughter gone." He froze. The room froze with him. It was the first time she had admitted it out loud. The raw truth broke something in him. His shoulders slumped, his face contorting into something between panic and disbelief. A man who had controlled every room he walked into now stood powerless in the middle of one. The knock at the door was firm. 2 officers. My aunt opened the door with trembling hands. Richard tried one last time, voice thin with desperation. "Don't let them. Please." But no one spoke for him. Not one. For the first time, every person in that room stood on the same side. Mine. The officers stepped inside. "Good evening. We received a call about a potential threat and evidence of criminal activity." Richard collapsed back into the chair, defeated and shaking. And I realized then that the moment had finally come. The fall of Richard Collier had begun. The officers stepped fully into the living room, their presence cutting through the panic like a blade through heavy rope. The tension didn't disappear, but it shifted, no longer volatile, no longer chaotic. Controlled. Contained. Every relative in that room took a collective breath they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Justice doesn't rush. Justice doesn't shout. Justice arrives in uniform and asks for the facts. And I had plenty. The senior officer, a broad-shouldered man with a calm, practiced voice, scanned the tense room before speaking. "We received a call about evidence of a credible threat against a family member." "Who made the call?" Kevin lifted his hand. "Over here, sir." The officer nodded once. "Thank you." Then those steady eyes turned to me. "You Captain Mercer?" "Yes, sir." Step outside with me, please. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight, the kind of tone used when talking to someone who might have the answers no one else does. I followed him onto the porch. The cold, Raleigh air struck my face, and I inhaled slowly, grounding myself. Festive lights wrapped around the porch railing flickered behind us, their glow painfully out of place compared to the gravity of the moment. The officer stood tall, hands resting near his service belt, but not tense. I understand you have documents relating to a potential threat. I unzipped the inner pocket of my uniform jacket, pulled out my phone, and unlocked the evidence folders. Everything is in chronological order. Audio files, financial documents, witness notes, public records, and a recording from a porch camera. I handed him the phone. He scrolled slowly, methodically, pausing on the insurance documents, zooming into the forged signatures, swiping through the loan files. When he reached the audio clip, he listened with the expression of a man used to hearing terrible things, but never numb to them. After almost 30 seconds of silence, he exhaled through his teeth, a sound of unmistakable recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a case. He gestured for his partner, a younger officer with a body camera already rolling. We're documenting this now. Say your name and roll clearly for the audio log. I straightened instinctively. Captain Sloan Mercer, United States Army Military Police, Fort Liberty. The younger officer nodded. Describe the nature of the evidence. I did. Calm, precise, factual. The same way I would debrief after a mission. No emotion, no speculation. Just truth. When I finished, the senior officer handed back my phone with a decisive nod. We have enough to detain him on multiple charges. We'll need copies of these files for our report. I already anticipated that. I sent them to the police's evidence intake email before leaving Fort Liberty. He blinked once, impressed. Efficient. Thank you, Captain. The front door opened behind us. Richard stepped outside, breath coming fast, eyes frantic. This is insane! He pointed at me, voice cracking. She's setting me up because she hates me. Ask her commanding officer she's unstable. The senior officer held up a hand. Sir, step back inside. No, Richard barked, taking half a step forward. You don't understand. The officer stepped in front of him in a single smooth motion. Sir, this is not a discussion. Richard's mouth opened, then closed again. His chest rose and fell rapidly. His eyes darted between me and the officers, calculating, collapsing, unraveling. My mother hovered behind him, shaking her hands clasped to her mouth. Sloan, she whispered, please say something. I didn't turn. I didn't speak. I couldn't save her from the consequences of the silence she chose for years. The senior officer asked him one more time. Sir, place your hands behind your back. Richard's face twisted, rage and fear colliding. I'm not going anywhere. You have no right. The officer took one step forward. I have the right, the evidence, and the authority. Hands behind your back. Now. Richard made a desperate move, not a violent one, just a tiny jerk backward as if he might run. But the younger officer anticipated it, shifting neatly to block him. In one practiced motion, the senior officer grabbed Richard's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and snapped on the first cuff. The second followed with a metallic click that seemed to echo across the porch. The sound of justice landing exactly where it belonged. Richard struggled weakly. You can't do this. You don't know what she's capable of. The officer secured the cuffs firmly. What we know is what you said, what you forged, and what you paid for. You'll have the opportunity to speak with an attorney. Richard looked at me, then a look full of venom, desperation, and disbelief all tangled into one. You're doing this to your own family. I held my ground. No, Richard, you did this to yourself. They guided him down the porch steps, his shoulders hunched, his breath shaking his boots, scuffing against the wood. My mother followed 3 steps behind, sobbing softly, reaching out as if trying to touch him, but too afraid to close the distance. When they opened the squad car door, Richard twisted once more toward me, voice cracking into something almost incoherent. You think you've won? You think this ends here? The officer pressed his head gently into the car. Save it for court. The door slammed. The engine started. The cruiser pulled away. My mother turned to me, face streaked with tears. Sloan, please Talk to me. I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had let silence grow into a weapon. The woman who had watched lies become normal. The woman who had stood in a garage and asked if her husband really needed to kill her daughter. There were words I could have said. Comfort. Reassurance. Anger. But none of them would change the truth. She had made her choices, so I made mine. I walked past her without a word. She reached out, fingertips brushing my sleeve. "Sloan, please." Her voice cracked into something broken. But I kept walking. Justice didn't need rage. It didn't need yelling. It didn't need vengeance. It needed evidence. And tonight, the evidence had spoken louder than any of us ever could. The police cruiser's taillights disappeared down the street, turning the corner until the red glow dissolved into the quiet Raleigh night. The moment they were gone, the world around me seemed to sag like the house, the porch, the trees themselves were exhaling after holding their breath for too many years. Behind me, my mother stood motionless on the front steps, one hand still suspended in the air where she had reached for me. She looked like a person hit by a wave she never saw coming. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Her shoulders shook. Her lips trembled around words she didn't yet know how to form. "Sloan." Her voice cracked soft and trembling like she was practicing a sentence she hoped would change the past. "Please, don't walk away." But I did. I stepped off the porch and onto the cold sidewalk, each footfall steady, deliberate. The kind of walk you learn after years of patrolling streets where hesitation can get someone hurt. My mother followed her footsteps, frantic and uneven, behind me. She caught up halfway down the walkway and grabbed my arm, not forcefully, but desperately, like a drowning person clutching onto anything solid. "Sloan, wait. Please." I stopped, not because she asked, but because the kind of confrontation that comes after years of silence shouldn't happen while walking away. I turned just enough to face her, not enough to step back into her emotional gravity. Her mascara had run in streaks down her cheeks. Her hands were trembling violently. She looked older than I had ever seen her, like the truth had aged her 10 years in 10 minutes. "Baby, you can't testify. You can't go through with this." Her voice shook between fear and pleading. "If you do, he'll go to prison for years. He'll lose everything." I blinked once, slowly. She kept talking, words tumbling out in a frantic flood. "You don't understand. He was scared he wasn't thinking clearly, and I know it sounded terrible, but he wouldn't have." She choked, unable to finish the sentence. "Wouldn't have killed me." It sat between us, heavy, undeniable. She swallowed hard. "He was angry. Desperate. He's made mistakes, but he loves us." I stepped back as her hand reached for mine again. "No." The word was flat, calm, cold. She froze. "No, that's all you have to say." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You stood in that garage. You heard him talk about planning my death. You didn't stop him." Her face twisted in anguish. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do. You should have stopped him. You should have said something. You should have protected me." Her breath shuddered. "I did my best." "No." I cut her off again. "You protected him." Her knees seemed to weaken at the accusation, her back bending slightly like the truth had weight she wasn't strong enough to carry. "Sloan, please, please don't testify. We can fix this." I shook my head once. "There is no we." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "This is Richard's doing, and your silence helped him." Tears spilled over again. I didn't know what he was planning. I didn't know he would go that far. My jaw tightened. "You asked him if it was necessary." Her face collapsed. That single line shattered her more than anything else I had said. She covered her mouth with her hand, sobbing. She tried again. "I was afraid. I didn't know how to save you." For the first time, anger, not rage, but something sharper flickered in my chest. "You didn't protect me. Not even once." Her sob broke into a sound so raw it almost didn't seem human. She collapsed onto the porch railing, clutching it as if she might fall to the ground if she let go. I waited not out of kindness, but out of finality. This was the moment the truth had to be spoken plainly. She looked up at me, eyes swollen and pleading. "If you testify, they'll put him away forever." He's my husband. He's all I have. That was when something inside me finally let go. The last string I had been holding on to. The last illusion that somewhere inside her was a mother who would choose me at least once. He's all you have because you let him be. She shook her head violently. That's not fair. You don't understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that she had been conditioned for years to believe survival meant obeying him, and I understood that she had chosen that obedience, even when it endangered me. I stepped back. The porch light cast a faint golden circle around her, but she looked small inside it, like someone standing inside a spotlight revealing everything she had hoped would stay hidden. I spoke quietly. You're asking me to protect the man who tried to kill me. Her breath hitched. Yes, no, I just don't want you to break the family apart. I lifted my chin slightly. He broke it. You helped him. The words hit her like a slap. She reached for me again, fingertips trembling inches from my sleeve. Let me make it right, please. Let me talk to the detectives. Let me explain no. You had years to explain. You had one moment to protect me. You didn't take it. She doubled over, sobbing uncontrollably. I looked at her one last time and felt something I hadn't expected: grief. Not for the mother I had, but for the mother I wanted her to be. The mother she never became. The one she chose not to be. I turned away and walked toward my car. She called after me, voice breaking. Sloan, please come back. Please don't leave me alone. But there are wounds that apologies cannot undo. There are betrayals that cannot be softened by tears. And there are choices that divide a life into a before and an after. I opened my car door and paused only long enough to say the last words she heard that night. You didn't protect me. Not even once. Then I closed the door and left her standing in the cold. The Army does not care about family drama. It does not care about who cried, who begged, who betrayed whom. It cares about protocol conduct and the question that sits at the root of every investigation involving an active duty soldier. Did your actions compromise the mission, the uniform, or national security? 3 days after Richard's arrest, I learned firsthand how that question feels when pointed squarely at your chest. A formal memo arrived in my inbox at 0600 sharp, stamped with the Fort Liberty crest and signed by the Provost Marshal's office. Captain Sloan Mercer, you are to appear before the Conduct Review Board at 1300 hours December 29, 2024. No explanation. No emotional cushioning, just the cold reality the Army was now involved. I sat on my bunk in the barracks office where I had temporarily relocated and stared at the message. My stomach tightened not out of guilt, but because I knew the Army examined everything. It would analyze my every movement, decision word, and instinct from that night. And if they believed I misused military police protocol for personal matters, I could lose my badge. Even worse, my commission. At 1300, I walked into the review board room, sterile, quiet, fluorescent lit, the air too cold to breathe comfortably. 3 officers sat behind a long table. Lieutenant Colonel Harper, known famously around post for her precision and spine of titanium. Captain Lee from JAG, sharp-eyed and unreadable. And Command Sergeant Major Dunn Arms' folded expression carved from stone. Major Elena Cortez waited in the corner, leaning against the wall with her arms behind her back, posture firm and protective, like a guard dog waiting for the signal to strike. She gave me one small nod. It was all I needed. LTC Harper opened the session without ceremony. Captain Mercer, this review concerns your involvement in a civilian attempted homicide. Your interaction with the hitman, suspect, the exposure of evidence, and the question of whether you engaged MP training or resources outside authorized use. Her gaze cut through me. Do you understand the purpose of this review? Yes, ma'am. My voice was steady. She nodded once. Begin your statement. I stood at the center of the room, boots locked, hands clasped behind my back, and I recounted everything. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just facts. The overheard conversation, the garage, the man in the driveway posing as a technician, calling 911 and using the military alert code only because the suspect had approached my residence directly and I believed there was an imminent danger to life. LTC Harper's pen scratched across the page. Captain Lee watched every blink. CSM Dunn's expression never changed. When I finished, Harper leaned back slightly. Why did you not report the threat immediately to civilian law enforcement? Because, ma'am, I lacked tangible evidence at that moment. The conversation I overheard occurred without recording, and making an accusation against a family member without proof could have been dismissed as retaliation or misunderstanding. Harper nodded slowly, but her eyes didn't soften. And why did you later present evidence publicly instead of delivering it directly to law enforcement? This time, my answer came from a colder place inside me. Because the intended victim was me, ma'am. And the people in that room were also the people who had been misled and exploited by my stepfather for years. Presenting the evidence ensured multiple witnesses, protected the chain of custody, and prevented the destruction of documents he would have otherwise tried to hide or manipulate. Captain Lee finally spoke. Did you use any restricted MP database or classified tool in the course of your investigation? No, sir. All searches were conducted through publicly accessible databases or through legal civilian request portals. All evidence collected was obtained on public property or through my own technology. CSM Dunn leaned forward slightly. Did you ever confront the suspect directly? No, Sergeant Major. At no point did I escalate contact. At no point did I brandish a weapon or initiate force. I maintained distance and followed civilian protocol for immediate threat situations. The room went quiet. Harper tapped her pen twice against her notebook. Major Cortez stepped forward then. Permission to address the board. Granted. Cortez walked to my side but spoke to the officers. I have supervised Captain Mercer for 3 years. She is disciplined, restrained, and deeply conscious of the legal boundaries of MP authority. I reviewed her evidence personally. I saw no sign of misconduct, overreach, or any breach of Army policy. She paused, her tone sharpening. The only thing Captain Mercer did wrong was survive. The sentence hit the room like a dropped weight. Even Harper stopped writing. Cortez continued. She followed every regulation. She recorded no private conversations illegally. She misused no equipment. She endangered no civilian. She did what any soldier trained in threat recognition would do: assess, document, and prevent loss of life. She looked at me then, and she did it without firing a shot, without laying a hand on anyone, and without allowing a dangerous man to harm her or anyone else. Harper sat still for a long moment. Then she closed her folder. Step outside while the board deliberates. I stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed quietly overhead. My throat felt tight, but not from fear, from exhaustion, from the weight of defending my right to survive. Cortez joined me after a minute, leaning against the wall. You did good in there, she murmured. I exhaled slowly. Do you think it will be enough? She looked me dead in the eyes. It should be. But the Army doesn't always do what it should. 20 minutes passed. 30. 40. Finally, Harper opened the door. Captain Mercer, return. I walked back inside, boots silent on the tile. Harper stood. The board has reached a unanimous decision. My breath held. Based on the evidence, testimony, and the assessment of your conduct during the events in question, the board finds no violation of military police protocol. Your actions were consistent with training within legal civilian boundaries and did not compromise military operations. The breath I had been holding escaped slowly. Harper added, voice steady. The board commends your restraint under threat and your adherence to proper conduct despite personal risk. You are cleared of all concern. Dismissed. I saluted sharply. Yes, ma'am. When I stepped out into the cold December air, the world felt different, not lighter, but clearer. The Army had looked at me the way my mother never did, without emotion, without excuses, without history. And after examining every detail, every choice, every instinct, it gave me the one thing she never had: validation. I survived, and I survived without breaking the code I lived by. 6 weeks after the arrest, just when I finally began to feel the first threads of silence weaving themselves into something that resembled peace, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I almost ignored it. Unknown numbers rarely bring anything good, but something in my stomach tightened. A cold instinct. A warning that felt like a gloved hand tapping my shoulder. I answered. Captain Mercer speaking. There was a short click, a mechanical shift in the line, and then a voice filtered through the static, strained and too familiar. Sloan. My stepfather's voice. Richard, from the Cumberland County Detention Center. It took every ounce of discipline in my body to keep breathing evenly. He exhaled sharply like he had been waiting for this moment. They only gave me 10 minutes. I didn't respond. The silence unsettled him. He rushed into the opening like a man scrambling to hold onto a rope slipping through his hands. Listen to me. We can fix this. You and me. I kept the phone pressed to my ear. My jaw locked my body cold. Fix this. The words sounded absurd, delusional, like paint smeared over a crime scene. He continued, I talked to my lawyer. He said if you recant your statement and say you misunderstood the situation, everything changes. I can get a reduced charge. You can come in and tell them you misinterpreted, that you panicked. He sounded hopeful, eager, the same tone he used for years when he was confident he could manipulate me. I said nothing. His voice hardened. You owe your mother a family. That sentence did something unusual to me. It did not anger me. It did not hurt me. It hollowed me, like someone reached through my chest and took everything that used to ache and replaced it with ice. I owe my mother a family. The irony of it nearly made me laugh. Instead, I asked calmly, Is that why you planned to kill me? He sucked in a breath, sharp and defensive. That is not what happened. You know that is not what happened. You twisted everything. You took things out of context. I closed my eyes and pictured the garage concrete, the oil stains, the cold air, his voice saying the words with precision. Kill her with one bullet. Quick. Clean. He kept talking, his voice bouncing between pleading and denial like a man jumping back and forth over a line drawn in the dirt. I was angry. People say things when they are angry. Your mother and I were discussing a situation. We did not mean it literally. I opened my eyes. Then why hire a man who showed up at my apartment pretending to be a technician? The silence on the line was dense, heavy. He recovered quickly. I don't know what you think you saw. People can stage things. You are a military police officer. You should know that. I nearly smiled. He was scrambling, reaching for excuses with bloody hands. You are the only one with access to my schedule, Richard. You are the only one who knew when I returned to post, and you are the only one who would profit from my death. His breathing grew erratic. You think you are so righteous, so untouchable in that uniform, but you ruined everything. Everything I built, everything I worked for. I held the phone tighter. You built nothing. You stole. You lied. You forged signatures. You emptied accounts. You used my mother as a shield and me as a scapegoat. And when you realized I knew too much, you looked for the fastest way to eliminate the problem. He inhaled shakily. His voice dropped to a whisper. You think you are safe now, but prison does not last forever. That was the closest he came to a threat, and the closest I came to hanging up. Still, I held steady. You have 7 minutes left. He swallowed audibly. Then his voice shifted again, cracking around the edges. Sloan, please. I need you. Your mother needs you. You are the only stable one. The only one with discipline. The only one with a future. You can help us. You can save us. Save. The word crawled under my skin. I remembered the fear in my mother's eyes, the silence she hid behind for years, the night she asked him if killing me was necessary. And now, this man was asking me to pull him out of the sinking pit he dug with his own hands. He kept talking. I promise I will change. I will get help. Therapy. Anger management. Whatever you want. Just take back your statement. Tell them you overreacted. He paused. I could hear faint voices behind him, the echo of steel doors, the clank of keys. Time was ticking. Please, Sloan. Please. I didn't want this. I didn't want you hurt, and I didn't want your mother to suffer. Just take it back. Think of her. My chest tightened, not with sympathy, but with recognition. He was using the only weapon he had left. My mother. Her sadness. Her collapse. Her dependence. The guilt she wrapped around me like a blanket for years. He thought he could pull those strings again, but the strings were gone. I cut them the night he aimed metaphorical crosshairs at me. I spoke slowly, clearly. You tried to have me killed. There is nothing left to fix. He tried one last tactic, the ugliest one. You are overreacting. You misunderstood. It was a figure of speech. You're dramatic. You are making a scene because you want attention. You want to be the hero. My heart did not race. My breath did not change. My voice stayed calm. A decade of military discipline wrapped around my spine like armor. He continued spiraling. You ruined my life. You destroyed everything. You will regret this. You think the army will protect you forever. You think you are strong. You are nothing without us. Nothing without family. My pulse stayed steady. I waited until he ran out of breath. Then I said the sentence that felt like it sliced through the dark cord that tethered him to my life. You aimed a bullet at me. This is the last time you say my name. He made a rattled noise, half gasp, half snarl. You ungrateful little... I hung up. Not angrily, not abruptly, just decisively, like closing a door that should have been shut years ago. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of the sound of chains breaking, full of the truth that I finally understood with perfect clarity. Some people do not change. Some people do not apologize. Some people do not deserve to say your name again. I placed the phone on the table and sat down slowly. My hands did not tremble. My breath did not falter. For the first time since the night I hid behind the garage door and heard the words meant to end me, I felt something profound. Peace. Not the soft, fragile kind. The strong kind. The kind built from truth, evidence, decisions, and the courage to walk away. The kind of peace you earn when you finally accept that survival is not betrayal. It is reclamation. I leaned back in the chair and whispered to the empty room. This is the last time. And it was. The morning of the trial began with a cold that felt almost ceremonial. January air in Raleigh always carries a sharpness, the kind that bites just enough to remind you that you are alive. The Wake County Justice Center towered above the street like a slab of gray stone carved out of a colder century. I walked toward it in my dress uniform, pressed blues, polished shoes, ribbons aligned to regulation posture, unbreakable. People moved aside when they saw me. Military bearing does that. But inside, beneath the fabric and the metals, my heartbeat was steady, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I was ready. Ready in a way I had never been ready for anything. Inside the courthouse, everything smelled of old wood and cold air conditioning. A bailiff directed me toward courtroom 7B. Outside the doors, I saw faces from my extended family. Some nodded with quiet support. Others avoided my eyes, unable to reconcile the man they once called good provider with the word defendant printed next to his name. I pushed open the doors. The courtroom hummed with low murmurs until people noticed me. Then it quieted. Major Cortez sat in the second row behind the prosecution table, her posture firm and proud, as if she refused to let me stand alone in any room ever again. I took my seat at the witness waiting area. Across the aisle, shackled at the wrists and ankles, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him small and ordinary, sat Richard Collier, my stepfather, the man who had once dominated an entire household with nothing but his voice and his temper. Now he sat hunched, pale lips pressed into a thin, angry line. His eyes snapped to mine. Contained fury, contained fear, contained consequences. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Carla Whitmore, was composed, concise, and lethal with her precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not a case of misunderstanding. This is not a family argument gone too far. This is a premeditated act, a planned and orchestrated attempt to take the life of Captain Sloan Mercer, a decorated military police officer. She clicked a remote and the first photo appeared on the screen. The garage. Grainy but unmistakable. 2 men, 1 envelope. The jury leaned forward collectively. Richard's attorney tried to reframe everything as a misinterpreted conversation, a moment of anger, a misunderstanding with no real intent. But the human mind knows truth when it hears it spoken plainly, and the evidence was far from plain. It was overwhelming. Then the clerk called my name. Captain Sloan Mercer. I rose and walked to the stand. The bailiff offered the oath. I raised my right hand and spoke the words with steady clarity. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I sat. Ada Whitmore began. Captain Mercer, can you tell the court what you heard the night of December 14th? Yes, ma'am. My voice echoed softly in the wood-paneled room. I repeated the words I had held in my mind since that night. Word for word, tone for tone. Kill her with one bullet. Quick, clean, she'll never see it coming. Some jurors swallowed, others stiffened. One older woman covered her mouth with her hand. Whitmore nodded. And at that moment, who did you understand those words referred to? Me. Why? Because I recognized the voice. It was the defendant's, the man who had been my stepfather for 17 years, and because the conversation referenced things only he and I knew. She asked about the garage, the envelope, the strange man, the driveway encounter. Each answer I gave was clean, controlled, stripped of emotion, but not humanity. Facts sharpened into testimony. His lawyer attempted to shake me. Captain Mercer, is it possible you misunderstood? No, sir. Is it possible you heard incorrectly? No, sir. Is it possible this was a figure of speech? He hired a man who showed up at my apartment 3 days later. He flinched. The jury did too. Then came the financial evidence. Signatures forged. Mortgages taken. Insurance policies altered. Transfers made. Every sheet of paper another nail driven into the coffin he built himself. At one point, his attorney objected. Speculation. The judge overruled him before the sentence finished. The prosecution has provided direct evidence corroborating motive. Move on. And so we did. Finally, Ada Whitmore approached with the USB, the same one I used during Christmas. Captain Mercer, do you recognize this? Yes, ma'am. It contains a recovered audio file from the exterior camera of the residence on December 14th. She inserted it into the court system. The speakers crackled. A voice. His voice. Clear. Cold. Intentional. Kill her with one bullet. Quick. Clean. She'll never see it coming. Someone in the gallery gasped. Richard's head dropped. The room froze in collective horror as the moment replayed from speakers that made it impossible to soften or deny. The judge asked Captain Mercer, in your professional capacity as an MP officer, how would you classify the threat level of this statement? An imminent and credible threat to life, Your Honor. He looked at the jury, and they all saw it. Not just as family drama, not just as betrayal, but as attempted murder. When I stepped down, my knees did not shake. My breath did not catch. I felt more stable than I had in years. The defense offered closing arguments filled with desperation, but desperation cannot rewrite recorded words. After deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. The judge asked me to remain for sentencing. I sat between Major Cortez and my cousin Amelia, who squeezed my hand tightly. Richard was brought back into the courtroom, shackles clinking. He looked smaller, not physically, spiritually, like someone had removed the scaffolding that held up the illusion he built. The judge adjusted his glasses. For the crimes of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, identity theft, and financial coercion, this court sentences the defendant to 22 years in state prison. You will be remanded immediately. Richard shook violently. No, no, Your Honor, please. The judge continued over him. All properties obtained through fraud or forged signatures are to be seized under state and federal forfeiture. Restitution will be awarded to Captain Mercer and to Mrs. Karen Collier for losses incurred. My mother cried quietly in the gallery. Not for me, for him. Richard spun toward me as guards tightened grip on his arms. You did this. You destroyed everything. You think you can walk away untouched. You think they care about you. You're nothing. Nothing. He struggled, but the shackles kept him grounded. The judge banged the gavel sharply. Remove him. As they dragged him away, he kept yelling, his voice cracking under the weight of his own downfall. I did not look away. I did not shrink. I did not flinch. For the first time, his voice meant absolutely nothing. The doors closed behind him with a metallic slam that rang through the courtroom like final punctuation. A small sound rippled through the room. A few people, family, extended relatives, even strangers applauded softly. Not loud, not celebratory. More like relief. The sound of a collective exhale. The sound of justice settling into its rightful place. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright winter sun. It hit my face like a spotlight, not exposing me, liberating me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't stepping away from danger. I was stepping toward freedom. And I whispered under my breath, not for him, not for the court, but for myself. It's over. It was. In the weeks after the sentencing, silence became its own kind of weather. A cold one. A clean one. And like any weather pattern, it changed everything it touched. Especially my mother. I heard about what happened to her not from her directly, but from a cousin who still checked in on me. The information arrived in pieces quietly, like someone delivering news about a fading storm that still managed to break branches on its way out. First came the foreclosure notice. Richard's fraudulent loans had finally surfaced in full after the trial, and the bank wasted no time reclaiming the house he had stacked on a foundation of lies. My mother was given 30 days to vacate the property. She had nowhere to go. She had no savings. No retirement account he drained that years ago. No job. No community because Richard had isolated her from every friend she had ever known. I absorbed that information the way a soldier absorbs battlefield updates clinically steadily without flinching. Then came the next update. She moved into a small assisted apartment complex in East Raleigh, one of those places meant for women starting over, especially those escaping financial abuse or dependency. Except she wasn't fleeing it. She was grieving the man who created it, and the daughter who refused to play along. I didn't visit immediately. Not because I was angry, but because something inside me needed distance space to rebuild the parts of myself that had been chipped away long before Richard ever threatened my life. But life does not always respect the timing we choose. One cold morning in February, as I walked out of the MP station after a shift change, I saw her. She was sitting on a metal bench outside the visitor area near the main gate of Fort Liberty. I stopped walking. The air stood still. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. Her shoulders were rounded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes scanning the parking lot with an anxious intensity. When she finally saw me, her face broke open, relief, fear, shame, and hope twisted together in a way I didn't know a single expression could hold. I considered turning around. Not out of cruelty, out of exhaustion. But instead, I took a slow breath and walked toward her. She stood quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Her voice trembled. "Sloan." I swallowed the emotion rising in my throat. "Mom." She took a tentative step closer, like approaching a wounded animal she wasn't sure would let her near. "I need to talk to you. Please." I hesitated, then nodded once. We walked to a quiet corner near the visitor parking area. She looked around nervously as if afraid the world would judge her collapse. I took in the details, the thin coat she wore despite the cold, the cracks in her voice, the tremble in her hands. She looked like someone whose life had been scraped bare. Her voice broke as she spoke. "They took the house, Sloan. Everything is gone. I am living in a room smaller than your old bedroom. Everything feels empty." She pressed a hand to her chest. Like something broke inside me and I don't know how to put it back together. I watched her carefully. I could see the desperation rising behind her eyes, the same desperation of someone clinging to denial for decades. She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know how deep it went. I didn't know he was planning to hurt you." I held her gaze. "You knew enough." She flinched. Tears gathered immediately. "Sloan, please. I lost everything. My home, my savings, my life." My voice stayed calm. "You didn't lose everything. You handed everything to him." She shook her head wildly. "That's not fair. I loved him. I believed him. I trusted him. You trusted a man who tried to kill me." The words were steady, not loud, not dramatic, just true. She collapsed onto the bench, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she cried. I stood there not moving, letting the truth sit between us like a third person. She finally whispered through her fingers, I chose wrong. I chose him. And now I'm alone. My throat tightened. Loneliness is the cost of loyalty to the wrong person. She looked up at me, then eyes red. I need you, Sloane. You're all I have left. The sentence felt like a rope thrown toward me, but with knots tied by guilt, not love. I sat beside her, but kept a few inches of space between us. Mom, needing me is not the same as loving me. Her tears welled again. I do love you. I always have. I shook my head slowly. Love is protection. Love is truth. Love is action. And you watched a man plot to kill me. She winced as if struck. Her voice fell to a whisper. I was scared. I didn't know how to stand up to him. I didn't know how to choose you without losing my home, my life. I answered quietly. You didn't choose me, even when choosing me meant saving my life. She choked on her sob, and then, after a long silence, she said the words she had been holding back. Can you forgive me? I inhaled through my nose. The February wind brushed across my face, cold and honest. Forgiveness. It was a word heavy enough to crush someone if used wrong. I looked at her, the woman who raised me, the woman who abandoned me, the woman who mourned the man who tried to end me. I spoke softly but firmly. I don't need to punish you. I don't hate you. I don't want anything bad to happen to you. But forgiveness is not the same as going back. Her expression froze. What do you mean? I met her eyes. Healing doesn't require returning. She blinked rapidly as if trying to understand. But I need you. I need my daughter. I shook my head. I'm not leaving my life to rebuild the ruins he made. She reached toward me, but her hand hovered in the air when she realized I wasn't moving toward her. Please don't leave me alone. Her voice cracked on the word alone. I answered quietly. You weren't alone. You chose him. And now you're facing the consequences of his actions, not mine. Her shoulders sagged as though something inside her finally surrendered not to me, but to reality itself. She whispered, voice trembling. What am I supposed to do now? I stood. Survive. Like I did. She looked up at me, tears streaming silently. I don't know how. I softened only slightly. Then, learn. It was the closest thing to compassion I could give her without betraying myself. She bowed her head, defeated. I turned toward the parking lot. She called after me, voice fading. Will I see you again? I paused. The truth came naturally. Maybe. When it doesn't hurt. I walked to my car without looking back. When I closed the door and started the engine, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not revenge. Closure. The kind earned not through endings but through boundaries. My mother lost everything because she chose a man who wanted me dead. I wasn't going to lose myself trying to rebuild her ruins. Healing doesn't require returning. For the first time, she understood that too. Peace does not arrive with a parade. It does not knock on your door wearing soft light and gentle music. Peace shows up like a stranger on a quiet morning, standing there with no explanation, simply waiting for you to open the door. The first time I felt that kind of peace was 2 months after the trial when I turned the key to a small single-story house on the edge of Chapel Hill. The kind with a narrow front porch, a squeaky screen door, and a backyard big enough for silence to stretch its legs. It was not fancy. It was not expensive. It did not need to be. It had sunlight that fell through the living room windows at 7 a.m. like warm water. It had a kitchen that smelled of pine after I scrubbed it on move-in day. It had a lock I controlled and a space no one had ever tried to take from me. The first night I slept there, I lay on my back in the quiet dark, listening for sounds that would never come. No shouting, no footsteps in the garage, no voice plotting my last breath, just the hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of branches outside my window. It was the first time in years that my shoulders weren't tight when I exhaled. I woke up before dawn the next morning with a thought that startled me in its simplicity. I am safe. Those 3 words were heavier than any weight I had lifted in the gym, but they were also freeing. That same week, I signed up for a community program offering free space for veterans to run self-defense or fitness classes. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to teach at first, only that I wanted to use what I knew for something good, something that didn't involve arrest reports, threats, or broken families. During one session at the community center, I noticed a group of women lingering by the bulletin board, hesitant, tired, carrying stories in their eyes they didn't want to say out loud. Survivors. I recognized the look. I had worn it once. That night, I went home and wrote out a full curriculum. Not just self-defense techniques, not just kickboxing drills, but lessons on situational awareness boundaries, voice control breathing under pressure, strength without violence, courage without chaos. The class launched 2 weeks later. Attendance doubled within a month. Some women came in trembling, barely making eye contact. Others arrived angry fists clenched with adrenaline and old pain. But slowly, session after session, I watched something extraordinary happen. Shoulders relaxed, eyes sharpened. Voices grew louder. Women who once apologized for taking up space began moving like they owned the ground beneath them. Every time they yelled during a pad strike, every time they learned how to block or pivot or push through fear, every time they stood taller at the end of class, I saw myself in all of them. The version of me who once lived in a house where danger pretended to be family. The version of me who stayed quiet so others wouldn't feel threatened by my strength. The version of me who believed survival meant shrinking. One evening after class, a woman named Danielle, a mother of 3 who had recently left an abusive marriage, waited until the room emptied. She walked up to me with a shaky breath. I just want to say, learning how to fight isn't what helped me most. Learning that I was worth protecting did. I felt my throat tighten. I nodded. That's the point. That was the point all along. Habit kept me busy. I replaced garage shadows with morning jogs on peaceful Chapel Hill trails. I traded evidence files for gardening gloves. I built a small raised bed in the backyard and planted tomatoes, even though I barely knew how to keep a houseplant alive. I learned how to make coffee without rushing. How to sit on the porch in the evenings without scanning the street for threats. How to let the quiet be something other than suspicious. Healing isn't loud. It isn't glamorous. It is slow. It is repetitive. It is choosing life every day in small ways until those small choices become permanent. One afternoon in early spring, I returned home from teaching a class and found a box on my doorstep. No return label, no handwriting I recognized. My pulse spiked an old instinct firing without permission. I brought it inside, carefully, set it on the table, and opened it with measured hands. Inside was a stack of letters. Old letters. Ones I wrote to myself during deployments, notes of fear, notes of hope, notes of survival, notes I must have packed and forgotten during the chaos of the past year. On top of the stack was a photo. Me at 19 in basic training expression, fierce and determined. The girl who knew nothing yet but felt everything deeply. On the back in handwriting, I recognized immediately my own. I had written only one sentence. You already survived the worst parts. I ran my thumb over the ink, slowly letting the truth sink in. I wasn't the weak one. I was the one who survived. That sentence became the foundation of my new life. It guided the way I spoke to my students. It guided the way I breathed when memories crept in. It guided the way I forgave not others but myself. Forgave myself for staying too long in places that were breaking me. For loving people who didn't love me back the right way, for hoping my mother would choose me before she had the courage to choose herself. Forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It meant moving forward without dragging the past behind me like a shadow. Occasionally, I received updates about my mother. She was adjusting slowly to her new apartment, attending counseling, learning how to be alone. It was progress. I wasn't ready to visit her yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt distance, necessary distance, the kind that allows healing, not hatred. One night, months after moving in, I sat on my porch while the sun set over the tree line. Fireflies blinked along the edge of the yard. The wind moved softly through the branches, and I realized something important. All my life, I had been fighting to be heard in a house where no one listened, fighting to be respected in a family that dismissed me, fighting to stay alive in a place where someone plotted to erase me. Now here, I fought for no one. I simply lived, peacefully, quietly, fully. I looked up at the darkening sky and whispered to the girl I used to be, "You made it. You're home." And in that moment, I felt my life settle into place like a book finding the right shelf. I wasn't the weak one. I was the one who survived. And survival, I learned, is not just what keeps you alive. It is what teaches you how to live. So let me ask you, now that you've walked this entire path with me, now that you've stood in my shoes for every betrayal, every moment of fear, every hour of courage, where are you watching from? And if you were me, what would your first move have been that night? Mom, I am writing this letter from the small desk in my Chapel Hill home, the one facing the backyard where the light falls in long golden strips across the grass every afternoon. It is quiet here, so quiet that I can hear my own thoughts without having to fight through the noise of someone else's anger. I wish I could tell you I wrote this to send it, but I didn't. I wrote it because there are words I need to say even if no one else ever hears them. Words that have been sitting inside me like stones, heavy and unmoving, waiting for me to finally lay them down. I guess I should start with the truth, not the softened one, not the version meant to spare feelings, the real one. Mom, I loved you in a way that bent the shape of my entire life. I loved you fiercely, defensively, blindly. I loved you so much that I convinced myself protecting you was the same thing as protecting myself. It wasn't. I know now that love isn't supposed to hurt like that. It isn't supposed to feel like swallowing your voice. It isn't supposed to feel like standing between someone you love and the wreckage they are sprinting toward. Love should be safety. With you for a long time, it never was. Some days I ask myself if things could have been different, if you could have chosen me instead of him, if you could have stepped forward and said stop, if you could have stood between me and the danger instead of between him and the consequences. But every time I imagine a different version of our past, I always come back to the same truth. You were not ready to be my protector. You were too afraid to lose the life you built with him, even though he was the one slowly tearing it down. You didn't know how to stand against him because somewhere along the way you learned to survive by staying silent. I spent years blaming myself for that silence, wondering if I wasn't enough, wondering if there was something wrong with me, something unlovable or too strong or too difficult, wondering if I scared you or disappointed you or pushed you away. But loving a daughter is not supposed to be a choice you weigh against a dangerous man's anger. Loving a daughter should never require courage at all. It should be instinct. And maybe you lost that instinct somewhere. Or maybe you were never taught what real love looks like either. Maybe you were surviving the only way you knew. I can accept that now. I can even learn to understand it. But understanding does not erase what happened, and it does not erase what didn't happen. You didn't step in when you heard the plan that could have ended my life. You didn't warn me. You didn't run outside to stop it. You didn't do any of the things a mother is supposed to do. And because of that, something between us broke in a way that apology cannot fix. I know you want forgiveness. I know you want to rebuild something from the pieces left behind. I know you look at me and see not just your daughter, but your last chance at a family. But Mom, there is something I need you to hear, something I need you to understand the way I finally do. Forgiveness and return are not the same thing. Forgiveness is release. Returning is surrender. Forgiveness is for me. Returning would be for you. And I cannot go back to a place that broke me just because you are lonely in the ruins. There is a difference between loving someone and allowing them back into the space where they can hurt you again. I can love you from a distance. I can wish you safety. I can hope you heal. But I cannot be the person who fills the void left by the man you chose over me. That is not my responsibility. That is not my purpose. And that is not the kind of love I owe you. There is something else I want to tell you, something I've never said out loud. When I moved into this new house, there were nights I sat on the porch and felt a strange guilt for feeling peaceful, like I was betraying you by building a life that didn't include you at the center. But then I realized something. My peace does not take anything from you. It does not diminish your healing. It does not replace you. It simply belongs to me. For the first time in my life, I am not living inside someone else's fear. Not yours, not his. For the first time, I can breathe without waiting for the next storm. I needed that peace, Mom. I earned it. I fought for it the way I fought for myself that night in the driveway. The way I fought when I stood in front of the jury. The way I fought every day I refused to disappear just because someone else wanted me gone. You once told me that strength looks different for everyone. You said yours was quiet, held inside, hidden in the places no one could see. Maybe that was true. But my strength became visible the moment I stopped trying to make myself smaller for the sake of people who didn't know how to love me. I want you to find your own strength now, not the borrowed kind, not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's approval. The real kind, the kind that grows when everything else falls apart and you finally recognize that you are still standing. I hope your new apartment becomes more than a place to survive. I hope it becomes a place to start over. I hope you find friends, find community, find a life that is yours and yours alone. And I hope one day you understand this. I did not walk away to punish you. I walked away to become the version of myself I could never be in that house. The version who chose life. The version who chose truth. The version who chose peace over pain. Maybe someday our paths will meet again in a way that doesn't hurt. Maybe someday you will find the courage to rebuild yourself not as someone's wife, not as someone's possession, but as your own person. And maybe on that day we can talk again, not as a mother and daughter broken by betrayal, but as two women who learned how to survive in different ways. Until then, I will hold space for you in a quiet corner of my heart, a place without anger, a place without fear, a place without expectation, just a place where the truth can live without hurting either of us. I wish you healing. I wish you peace. I wish you the strength to build a life that does not depend on anyone who diminishes you. This letter will stay here on my desk unsent, and maybe that is where it belongs. Because some truths are meant to be spoken for the sake of the speaker, not the listener. This is one of them. Sloan. Morning light feels different when you're no longer afraid of waking up. I didn't realize that until the first spring in my Chapel Hill home. The sunrise here doesn't rush. It stretches itself slowly across the sky, as if it knows I need time to adjust. It slips through the kitchen window, warming the countertop, gliding across the floorboards, reaching me gently while I make coffee. I no longer gulp out of habit, but sip with intention. I used to wake up listening for danger. The click of a garage door, heavy footsteps, raised voices. Now I wake up to the hum of the dishwasher, the soft creak of the house settling, and birds scattering across the backyard when they notice movement from the window. It's strange how peace feels foreign at first, like wearing a jacket that doesn't quite fit yet. I would stand on the porch in my bare feet, mug in my hand, watching the sunlight melt the dew from the grass, and still feel the instinct to check over my shoulder. Old habits die slowly, but they do die. One morning, while I was watering the tomato plants I planted months earlier, the ones I was certain would die and somehow didn't, I caught myself humming. A small, simple tune. Something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. I stopped watering and stood perfectly still. Then I laughed softly because it startled me to realize happiness can sneak up on you like that. My life began to take on new rhythms. Work at Fort Liberty steady and structured. Evenings teaching kickboxing and self-defense at the community center. Weekends exploring local cafes or hiking the little trails tucked behind the greenways of Chapel Hill. And every night returning to a house that greeted me with quiet instead of tension. There were moments of loneliness, but even those felt cleaner than before. Not the suffocating loneliness of living with people who refused to see you. This loneliness was spacious, reflective, the kind that allows room for rebuilding. With time, the class I started for women survivors of violence became more than a program. It became a circle of strength. They shared stories, victories, setbacks. They learned to punch, to stand taller, to set boundaries they once believed they weren't allowed to have. Some brought their daughters. Some brought their friends. Some brought only their determination. One evening after class, as I was rearranging mats, a woman named Lila remained sitting cross-legged on the floor. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, her hair silver and tied in a low braid. She had escaped a husband who controlled her finances, her movements, her voice. She had bruises the first week, but by week 8, she carried herself like a woman reclaimed. She approached me slowly. "Captain Mercer," she said quietly today. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the woman he hurt. I saw the woman who survived. "Thank you." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Her victory felt like mine. That's the thing about healing, it spreads. It has a way of echoing into the lives of people who need it, even if they never know your story. And somewhere in those echoes, I found parts of myself I thought were gone forever. I also found new rituals that grounded me. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market downtown, where I bought fresh bread from a woman who always asked about my week. Sunday afternoons spent reading on the porch while the wind shook the magnolia tree. Evenings cooking meals that didn't have to be rushed or eaten out of stress. Once, while chopping vegetables for dinner, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. Not from adrenaline, not from memory, not from grief. They were steady, controlled, free. My mother called sometimes, not often, but enough. Always with updates about her counseling, her slow progress, her attempts to rebuild a life from a foundation that had finally been stripped to its truth. I listened when I could. Other times, I let the call go to voicemail not out of anger, but out of boundary. Healing doesn't demand that you open every door someone knocks on, it just asks you to stop locking yourself inside with the people who broke you. One afternoon, while restoring a small wooden table I found at a thrift store, I realized I wasn't thinking about danger or betrayal or courtrooms. I was simply sanding wood varnish dust floating in the air, the sun warming my back. Existing, living, breathing. My life was no longer defined by survival. It was defined by presence, and that presence became even stronger in late spring when I decided to adopt a dog. A rescued mutt with golden fur and anxious eyes. I named her Ember. She followed me everywhere, curling up at my feet while I read, trotting behind me while I tended the garden, resting her head on my knee during quiet nights when the house felt too big. Together, we built routines. Together, we healed. And in those moments, early mornings on the porch, watching Ember chase fireflies, late nights listening to rain against the windows, I realized peace wasn't just the absence of pain. It was the presence of choice. I chose what I let into my life. I chose who I allowed near me. I chose the silence. I chose the light. One evening in June, after finishing a class at the community center, I decided to take the long way home. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the kind of sunset that makes the whole world feel suspended. I drove with the windows down, the warm air brushing against my face. And for the first time, I understood something that had eluded me for years. Freedom is not just walking away from what hurt you. Freedom is walking toward what makes you whole. I parked in the driveway, stepped out of the car, and listened to the soft hum of cicadas in the trees. Ember brushed against my leg, tail wagging. I stood there for a long moment, absorbing the quiet. It no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt earned, welcomed. Mine. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. I didn't need anyone to understand the weight of what I carried or the strength it took to put it down. Peace finally felt like home, and home finally felt like something I could choose, not something I survived inside of. As the last of the daylight faded, I whispered the truth that had come to define not just my past but my future. Family isn't blood. Family is who doesn't load the gun against you. And for the first time, I believed it completely. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, through every moment of fear, every betrayal, every step toward rebuilding a life that finally feels like mine, then I want to speak to you directly now. Not as Captain Sloan Mercer, not as a soldier, not as someone who survived something unthinkable. I want to speak to you as a person who knows what it means to break to heal, to choose peace, and to stand back up even when standing feels impossible. You've witnessed every chapter of this story. You saw the night I hid behind a garage door, hearing my stepfather plan the end of my life. You saw the moment I realized survival wasn't instinct, it was strategy. You watched as I gathered truth piece by piece, even when truth hurt more than ignorance. You were with me through the Christmas exposure, the courtroom justice, my mother's collapse, my quiet rebuilding in Chapel Hill, the backyard mornings, the community classes, the healing that bloomed slowly in places I thought were dead. And now that you've reached the end of my story, I want to ask you something real, something honest, something only you can answer. Where are you watching from? Not just the city or state, though I'd love to hear that too. I mean, where are you in your life? Are you in a moment of rebuilding like I was? Are you in a quiet season where peace feels unfamiliar? Are you fighting battles no one knows about? Are you carrying scars from people who should have protected you but didn't? Or maybe you're on the other side of the storm, looking back at the wreckage you walked through, realizing how strong you truly were, even when you felt weak. I want to hear your voice. I want to know your thoughts. Because stories aren't just stories. They're mirrors. They're bridges. They're lanterns held up in dark rooms so someone else can find the door. Maybe you've never faced something like what I survived. Maybe your struggle looks different. Maybe yours is loneliness. Or financial stress. Or a fractured family. Maybe yours is the heaviness of being the strong one for too long. Or the pain of realizing someone you trusted wasn't who you believed they were. If any part of my story touched you, tell me which part. If any sentence made you pause, tell me why. If any moment felt like your life whispered back at you, share it. You never know who might read your comment and feel less alone because of it. This channel is more than a place where stories are told. It's a place where people see themselves, a place where strangers from all over the world gather because something in the human experience binds us together, whether it's resilience, heartbreak, anger, justice, or healing. And speaking of justice, if you were in my shoes that night, standing in that dark kitchen, hearing a voice you trusted plotting your last breath, what would your first move have been? Would you have confronted them? Would you have run? Would you have frozen? Would you have pretended nothing happened? Would you have told someone? Or would you have done exactly what I did, slip into survival mode and let the truth guide every step forward? Your answer matters. Your perspective matters. Your instincts matter. And believe it or not, your comment may help someone else who feels trapped right now. Someone who needs clarity. Someone who needs courage. Someone who needs to see what choosing themselves looks like. And if you're one of those people, someone standing at the edge of a hard truth, someone afraid to leave, afraid to stay, afraid to choose, afraid to lose, then let me tell you something I had to learn the hardest way possible. You don't owe your destruction to anyone, not to family, not to blood, not to history, not to promises you made when you were too young to know better, not to people who only love the version of you they can control. You deserve a life that doesn't ask you to shrink, a life that doesn't require apology just to exist, a life that doesn't place you in the shadows while others take center stage. You deserve mornings filled with light, evenings filled with quiet routines that bring you peace instead of panic. You deserve to breathe, and sometimes breathing means leaving behind what suffocates you. If this story gave you even 1 ounce of strength, even 1 moment of clarity, even 1 reminder that you deserve to survive and heal, then let me know. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell me what part made you realize you're stronger than you thought. Tell me where in the world you are listening to this from, whether it's a small town with quiet streets, a busy city with lights that never fade, or somewhere in between. You'd be surprised how many people watch from the same place you do, and if you've ever walked through darkness, if you've ever crawled out of a place that tried to break you, if you've ever rebuilt a life from ashes, then share your victory, big or small. A win is a win, and victories deserve to be spoken into the world. And to the ones who are older, the ones who have lived enough life to know that families are complicated, choices are painful, and betrayal cuts deeper when it comes from people you love, your wisdom matters here too. What would you tell someone younger standing where I once stood? What advice would you give them? What warning? What hope? What truth? Drop your thoughts below. This channel reads every comment because your voice isn't background noise. Your voice is the heartbeat of why these stories matter. And finally, if you were me that night, standing in the dark, realizing the people you trusted most were the ones aiming the gun at you, what would your first move have been? I'm listening. We all are.